Again, it's good to be home. Hired. Okay. Hello. Welcome to the afternoon. I hope we don't bore you to death. Quick note, the first time I presented at BSL Lisbon was some years ago, and I was presenting with my good friend, David Sopas. It was the last time I ever presented in a duet on stage. So it's a great pleasure to be here with Trey presenting something again in a duet fashion. Trey has been thinking about the topic we are going to present for a long time. That should be here, but it's still not. Perfect.
Hang on, sorry.
So it's been very interesting to work on this forest over here challenge. It has trees.
When you do that again.
I don't see wildlife, maybe because
No chipmunks?
no chipmunks. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, there we go.
There you go again. So has been thinking this about this problem for a lot of years. I just started like 1 year ago, and I'll get to that. But it has been a very interesting research partnership. It has a very special mind and way to address problems. Definitely doesn't fit into Jan's law of triviality when he's thinking about stuff. He's thinking about everything, everywhere at the same time. So let's begin, Trey.
Thanks, Pedro. And good to be here in Lisbon. It's my first time here, and I can't believe it's my first. It won't be my last. So a Rube Goldberg machine is a pretty good model for our modern infrastructure. Lots of moving parts, but not all designed for today's load. If we bought this particular Rube Goldberg machine at IKEA, somebody definitely threw out the assembly instructions.
Yeah, they probably used the leftover screws to build some LLM or some badge, I guess.
Oh, yes. So our talk today is about time integrity, the glue holding this whole distributed system we call the internet together.
And we're not talking about NTP patch levels here. We're talking about trust in time itself. If the clock lies, everything that's built on top of time starts to wobble.
That's right. So before we dive in, a bit of quick history so we're all aligned. Time on the net was first improvised, then standardized. NTP was syncing machines back in the early 80s, perhaps before ARPANET even moved to TCP/IP. It used a 32-bit unsigned counter starting in 1900. This yielded 136 years rolling over in 2036. In the 1980s, that felt infinite. No one imagined the same protocol still driving the global internet 4 decades later. NTP was the life's work of David Mills. He passed in 2024, leaving us that gift. But even the most elegant protocols have finite horizons. So in 7 February 2036, NTP's counter rolls over, and many dependent systems will suddenly think it's 1900. Think of your TLS certificate change, your logs, your forensics, instantly trying to parse the Victorian era. This happens 2 years before the 2038 bug, which you probably came here to hear about, which is, in fact, the signed integer version of this story. See, computers mostly reckon time by counting seconds since 1 January 1970, with a 32-bit signed time t-struct that yields about 2.1 billion seconds, or about 68 years. At 3:14:07 UTC on 19 January 2038, this counter maxes out. The sign bit flips and time jumps back to December 1901, which is, interestingly, the Edwardian era, not the Victorian era. So anything touching C inherits this time t-struct. Operating systems, databases, protocols, firmware. It's the sword of Damocles hanging over billions of devices. The Linux kernel's patched, maybe, but userland and tool chains are not, nor is our installed base. Now, this looks like CWE 190, but it's bigger. See, you're not wrong. It is a classic integer overflow, but you're also not right. When the shared clock overflows across billions of systems all at once, it stops being just a bug. Now it's a vulnerability class. So let's name that class clearly. Y2K affected maybe 100 million systems, 50 to 100. Today it's on the order of tens of billions. Routers, industrial controllers, telecoms, medical, power, all ticking toward the same rollover. And because authentication and coordination rely on time, a single epoch slip could lock millions of sysadmins out or desync entire networks. Now, I tried setting a 2038 reminder in my Proton calendar because I was going to say that you should all set a reminder in your calendar, and I said, let me not be a hypocrite. I'll go do it myself. But it turns out that Proton Calendar, which launched in 2022, only supports events between 1970 and 2037. If even the best, most security-minded teams on planet Earth are brushing up against these hard-coded limits today, then legacy stuff is doomed. There's almost no coordination or awareness today. You see bugs, you patch, but vulnerability classes require coordination. Where did this come from? Unix time started as a pragmatic hack back in the 1970s, just count seconds. On a PDP-11, a 32-bit signed long made sense. Marshall Kirk McCusack, who was sharing an office with Bill Joy in Berkeley back in the 80s, told how at the time the compilers didn't even have options for 64-bit math yet. So originally this was a 16-bit number counting minutes. This proved unworkable and they killed that idea fast. Around Bell Labs version 4, maybe 5, they moved to a 32-bit system counting seconds. This gave us 68 years. Back then, 68 years felt like forever. As I approach my 48th birthday, I can assure you, time moves fast. Nobody expected a research project to become planetary infrastructure. That disco-era hack got baked into POSIX. Pragmatism ossified, the design pattern proliferated, and here we are today. But 2038 is just a pivot in a century of rollover risks. Here's a mental map for you. See, these aren't random bugs. They're a pattern baked into binary arithmetic. They cluster on the bit width boundaries, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, whenever a counter runs out of room. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. So 36 and 38 are just the opening shocks in a century-long cascade. If we don't fix the pattern now, we'll surely meet it again in 06, and in whatever protocol hides the next ticking bomb. Now, try selling that complexity to your board. Y2K had a 10-second elevator pitch. 2000 looks like 1900. Everybody got it. 2038 needs a crash course in signed integer math and epoch rollovers. 5 minutes in, and your board's already tuned out on their phone. It's not about competence. It's about cognitive load. See, 2038 is not an elevator pitch. Now to the question of prior art. I first spoke publicly about this space back in 2016, the opening keynote at O'Reilly Security, the morning that the world all woke up to the first Trump presidency. Since then, I've spent almost a decade chasing this particular question quietly because it seemed tinfoil hat. But I was sure that there must be some working group somewhere in the world. And so I joined the Belgian National Cybersecurity Agency, the Center for Cybersecurity Belgium, in their early days. My goal was to use that network and access to try to figure out who the heck was working on this. And I left there, I went to Accenture, I ran for the first board of directors, where I got to travel all around the world, meeting people from Tokyo to Montreal and spending weeks at a time hosted by national cybersecurity agencies around the globe. And what I found was that there was no working group tracking this. I could not find it. For all the effort of 10 years, what I found was silence and polite confusion and nervous laughter. So to everyone hearing me out on this topic of 2038, I thank you for listening. But to Pedro, thank you for hearing me. So when you spot a systemic failure, you might well ask, sorry I went too fast there, is there a historical precedent sometime when we hard-coded 32 bits into a thing and said, whoops, that's too small? Yes, IPv4 to IPv6. So let's look at this. Let's hold up a mirror. One protocol, one 32-bit field, which we outgrew. The first RFC to standardize IPv6 was back in '95. Over 30 years later, countless industry working groups, vendor coordination efforts, national mandates, billions spent, and where are we now? Hovering around 50% adoption on the scannable side of the firewall. Most enterprises still depend on IPv4 because of deep technical debt. IPv4 exhaustion was gradual. 2038 is a cliff. There's no market push to fix it. But I suggest to you, if one 32-bit address field took us 3 decades to halfway replace, 32-bit time may not be easier. Meanwhile, standardization exploded. We've gone from about 2,500 RFCs circa 1999 to nearly 12,000 projected by 2038. These define everything in our stack: networking, timing, data exchange. Each new RFC links to dozens of others. Change one and the ripple spreads globally. The spec stack grows dense, and with AI tools drafting fresh text, the churn will only accelerate. Fivefold growth means compounding complexity, and complexity breeds fragility. Interlocking standards like a root ball, binding the foundations together, but impossible to untangle. And it's not just the IETF. See, they get the spotlight, but they're just one stall in a global marketplace. There's ISO, ITU, 3GPP, IEEE, GSMA, and countless closed standards bodies we don't even see. Change one field in one spec, and this ripple spread through dozens of others. Coordination across technical committees normally takes years, but we have multiple rollovers converging on us in barely a decade. By 2038, we'll be juggling tens of thousands of standards, each a part of our global Rube Goldberg machine, and each a potential fault line. Scale has also exploded. Back in '99, it's hard to ballpark it because this was the early days of the internet, and so measurement hadn't matured. So we'll say 50 to 100 million devices. Today we're past 30 billions, at least a 5 to 600x jump, purely numerically, since Y2K. The defining factor in the 2038 equation is the multiple orders of magnitude growth of our install base. This has exploded. This superlinear growth is the fastest technological expansion in human history. Unlike 2038, for 2038, unlike Y2K, we don't even have a denominator. We're scaling blind. And so we measure what we can see. People assume NTP is fixed. 2036 fixes were rolled out in NTP v4 back around 2010. So we scanned about 200,000 internet-facing NTP servers, and we found roughly 1 in 3 failed the 2036 test. This yields about 62,000 vulnerable NTP servers. That's just the visible tip of the iceberg. The line of visibility is refracted by the firewall, but what we do see proves the iceberg is real. Now, some nations treat time like critical infrastructure. Take Sweden, for example. They treat it like a national utility. They have a system that's air-gapped with atomic-backed, redundant Stratum 1 servers, NTS security, a new protocol that they funded and developed, GPS independence, and a sustainable public funding model that involves tagging the revenue of all the ISPs for, I think it's something like a fraction of 1% to pay for this. If Sweden can do it, why can't we? They invest, they own their clocks. So here's a pivotal question. If expanding one 32-bit field took decades and billions, what happens when tens of thousands of protocols must be revisited within a single decade? We're at T-minus 49 quarters.
Yeah, as I gaze through your faces, some of you might be thinking there's a lot of FUD in this talk, right? I clearly remember 1 year ago, I was heck loose. I was watching Trey trying to do the elevator pitch for Y2K38 in a lightning talk. So that was hard, well done. But I was thinking about this. Is this just, fear, uncertainty, and doubt? And at the time, you might remember I was trying to blow up some gas stations. So I was testing some stuff. And I went and tested those devices. And the devices I tested, they failed on the rollover. And I thought, okay, that's funny. Then I looked around and I tested my watch, my wristwatch. And it failed too. And I thought it was a coincidence. Then I go and I run around the house testing all my TVs, and half of my TVs also had issues. And then I got concerned. Then I called Trey and say, hey, buddy, you want to start working on this? Because I'm concerned. So I state that I don't think it's FUD. Please entertain my formula here. I state that FUD is actually uncertainty plus doubt, right? But in this very special case, doubt is 0. We know this is going to happen. It has a fixed date. It's 2038. So there's 0 doubt. And if there's 0 doubt, all it remains is uncertainty, right? Uncertainty about what? About what will fail. How hard will those things fail? Where are all those things and devices and software pieces that might fail? We need to solve for uncertainty so we can gauge fear. Where will fail is anything that uses Unix time T 32-bit anywhere in its stack. So I'm not talking about old or only about old 32-bit kernels here. I'm also talking about newer 64-bit devices that ship 32-bit userland libc. I'm talking about drivers. I'm talking about SDKs. I'm talking about database fields, file format fields, timestamps in protocols that use a 32-bit timestamp. This can be everywhere. So no, I don't think this is a hype. For epoch rollovers, FUD is just simplify. We have no doubt it will happen. We have a date. We only have uncertainty. So how can we solve for uncertainty? I call it the discovery challenge. So we talk about we need to figure out what's vulnerable, where it lives, and how to fix it. That's easier said than done. What's vulnerable, it's kind of 32-bit stuff mostly. And what's not, it's 64-bit stuff sometimes. So there's a lot of uncertainty here, right? So I started thinking about, okay, what approaches and methods can we use to search for vulnerable devices? I work for BitSide. It's a company that we scan the internet, every day. So it was kind of natural for me thinking about, okay, let's use our scan data. We have scans for stuff. So if we think about scanning and fingerprinting, maybe we can see something there. We can also, think about client-side stuff. There are stuff connected to the internet that's not easily reachable, but they are still using the internet. So there's endpoint metrics, maybe statistics, maybe sinkhole data, and guess who has one of the largest sinkhole operations in the world too? This guy. So I was also, looking at our sinkhole data and trying to figure out more, or where could we find these vulnerable devices. We can look at software repositories, SBOM lists, firmware. There are companies that are downloading firmwares at scale and deriving the SBOMs from it. It's very interesting data. Do you know who has that data at hand? I don't, but if you know, please reach out because it's very interesting information for us to use too. Hardware, go read the hardware specifications, go read protocols or RFCs, check dumps if the RFCs are not public. There's a lot of approaches and ways to study this. And in the next slides, I will share with you some of our, explorations into these data sets. Now, first case is kind of obvious. If you ever did pen testing back, 20 years ago, you search for SNMP. SNMP had a lot of information. It still does if you have, the proper username and password. It used to be easier back in the days. Nevertheless, there are still a lot of SNMP exposed online. And we look at our scan data, there's around 15 million IP samples last month alone that we can derive some sort of information about the underlying architecture, and sometimes we can even get the Linux kernel version. So with those pieces of information, we can kind of derive high quality probes to understand if they're vulnerable or not. So for example, of the 600,000 systems we saw, 400,000 we were able to properly identify precisely the architecture, if it's 32-bit or 64-bit. Of those, half were a little more than half 32-bit. So that's a big telltale sign. If you're running a 32-bit system, probably will crash. And then from those, around 20,000 of them actually had the full Linux kernel version. Now we know which year the Linux kernel corrected this patch, so we have additional information to kind of state, well, there's a very high probability that these systems will definitely crash, around 14,000 of those systems. The maps you see below is just a way to show that this issue really impacts everybody, everywhere, and it will happen all at the same time. Moving into another server-side example, NTPD. NTPD, Trey was showing the data that around 1/3 of those NTPD servers were vulnerable to 2036 rollover. But interestingly enough, more than 2/3, or at least almost 2/3, are actually running 32-bit architecture. So will have they been patched for 2036 rollover just to fail a couple of years later? That's an interesting question. We have to check, and we have to understand if that's going to happen or not. It's the only way. So Portugal has a lot of red dots there. Red is bad. You don't want red. Okay, moving away. So I was trying to blow up gas stations last year. So it's a research about ATGs. If you don't know what an ATG is an ICSOT system that's used to control fuel in big fuel tanks. You think about gas stations because that's the common use case, but there's all sorts of places where ATGs can be deployed. namely places that have big backup generators. So think about military facilities, think about hospitals, think about airports, think about your friendly data center. So from the ATGs that are exposed, there's around 10,000 of them online exposed, but there's over 1 million gas stations in the world today, and they have to have some sort of controller, an ATG controller, okay? And that's just gas stations. We don't even know where the other like backup generators are. So are these devices vulnerable? Will a rollover happen? And how bad it will be? Well, what I found interesting in this research is that I tested different devices, different code bases, brands, models, and they both failed in the same way. And if you forget about a second, this is an ATG, and think about an ICSOT system in general that has a web interface, right? The remote administration started to fail. Why? Because the user could log in, it verified the username and password, but then generated an authentication token that was always expired. It was back in 1901. Doesn't work. You're always locked out. Both devices failed in the same way. In this case, there's leak detection freezes because the timestamps were all messed up, so it couldn't detect if there's a leak or not. The logs were non-operational, so in essence, these devices cannot be used or remotely administrated. So that's concerning. Imagine a synchronized colonial pipeline event at worldwide scale all at the same time. Doesn't look good. Moving away from that example, moving to client side. I really like the smart TV example because a smart TV represents something that we are surrounded with in our day-to-day. It's a computer that doesn't look like a computer. Okay? There's a computer inside it, it's running, and it's supporting all kinds of systems across all sectors of our society. A smart TV, and nowadays everything is smart. You can't even buy a toaster that's not smart. So a TV is used to display information. It's not just to watch the game. So it could be in your hospital. It could be in your airport, in a subway. It could be everywhere. And essentially, what that State Strategy Analytics predicts by the end of next year, there will be over 1 billion smart TVs in the world working. 1 billion with a B, that's almost billions and billions, like Carl Sagan would have said. So how can we fingerprint these smart TVs if they are not directly reachable and online? Well, some of them I learned that are, which is also bad news. But anyway, you can, the vendors have the brand and models that connect to their firmware update servers and things like that. So they have that telemetry, but so do ad companies sometimes, because they serve ads when you go watch YouTube on your TV. They grab some information about your TV, but funnily enough, also malware, because some TVs come pre-installed with malware. And I was looking at our sinkhole data, and we have some TVs there. And I just did a quick search. In a week, I found 127,000 TVs pre-infected with malware, communicating with just our sinkholes that just see a small part of what's going on in the world. But 6% were vulnerable to the rollover. How do I know that? It was the brand and model of my TVs back home. So I tested those ones. Are there more? Are there less? We don't know. We have to go and check. But I'm not saying 6% of 1 billion is vulnerable, but any percentage of 1 billion is a very large number. Okay, the examples could go on and on. These are just some explorations. There's a group chat. I see some of you on your laptop. And if you are, please open your laptop and run this command on your terminal. Find your modified time, some date over 2039, and just raise your hand or just yell if it fails. I know you want to be the first to yell. Okay, measuring this at scale is very hard. Okay, we have to accept that at some point we are going to be unable to map out every single system with high confidence. So to have a more accurate insight about the scale of the issue, we can correlate different data points in some heuristic fashion. We can take educated guesses to have a way to look at this problem at a global scale. For example, the OS vendors have statistics about the different computers that install their own systems, and luckily Debian shares these statistics. It's in a package called Popularity Context, funny name. So we can kind of use that as a proxy to understand a Debian system per year, how likely it is to be a 32-bit system or not. We have the statistics. Imagine you scan the internet, you find a bunch of different, fingerprint, and you find that FTP server over there with, it was built in 2003. So built into 2003 and still deployed and online, probably, likely it's running on a 32-bit system. Is it 100% accurate? Well, it's not, but it's a start. So with that in mind, I start to explore more and more all of those architectures that Debian was sharing and trying to figure out which one were 32-bit, which one were 64-bit, and then plot it over time. And if you're a mathematician, you should be very excited right now because these are our perfect adoption curves and declining curves. And they kind of show that sometime around 2012, 64-bit systems became more popular than 32-bit systems, but 32-bit systems didn't go away. They are still being used and reported back today. Is this a universal proxy for every single Linux system? Well, it's not. There's operating system bias in this kind of predictions. There's distribution bias even, like a Red Hat Enterprise Linux will probably have longer adoption cycles because they last longer. Probably Ubuntu systems, they cycle faster, so there's more newer systems coming into the market, but it's still a useful proxy. For Debian, it's a perfect snapshot. Any Debian system, we can use this to try to assess by year which architecture is behind that system. And for Linux Debian derivatives, it's also a good approximation. It's a way to gauge the weather, so to speak. Anyway, my last chart, I promise. SSH is extremely widespread across many systems. I don't have to tell you that. It makes a very interesting target to study. It does not report the architecture when being scanned. Well, usually it reports its implementation, right? Its version, sometimes even the underlying operating system we can see. So I looked into two distant implementations to see how widespread they are. But they are very different implementations. That's on purpose. I wanted to understand what is the probability of a version, given its release year, being deployed on a 32-bit system. So that's chart A. So the two different versions are Dropbear and OpenSSH. Dropbear has a completely different probability of being deployed on a 32-bit system than OpenSSH. It makes sense because Dropbear is specifically designed for low resource and historically, 32-bit systems. Many times, they are still 32-bit systems despite the hardware is 64-bit because running a 32-bit system consumes less memory. It's faster. So you have a 64-bit processor, but it's still a 32-bit system behind it. OpenSSH is, full feature, standard SSH server for all mainstream servers, desktops, and so forth. So I wanted to understand how likely it is for a 32-bit system to also be vulnerable to Y2K38, given the release year. And that's chart B. So if you are running a 32-bit system, how likely it is to be vulnerable? Well, before the patches, before anyone fixes anything, you're 100% vulnerable, almost, except if you're running OpenBSD, which has been vulnerable for a long time, or some Windows versions. But you can kind of measure this at scale. If you multiply the two together, you end up creating a rough vulnerability of the probability that will tell you how likely it is that a random SSH server, as long as it is, in this case, Dropbear or OpenSSH, random one, is vulnerable to Y2K38. So looking at the data set of 12.5 million SSH fingerprints that had like the exact full version information, like CP 2.3, then we can access using these methods that around 2.5 million are probably vulnerable to Y2K38. Now read all these charts with a grain of salt, okay? They are approximations, they are estimatives, they are good guesses given our research. And I do believe that the results are not exactly like this, but they are in the same order of magnitude. Interesting to note about scanning for this, unlike CVE scanning, if you do like vulnerability research and trying to identify vulnerable versions, unlike that, the false positives are usually low because package backports usually cannot fix this issue. You cannot backport, let's say, an OpenSSH version and fix it to use 64-bit time because the operating system hasn't been updated yet. You have to update the whole thing. So in this sense, it's easier to have less false positives. But the main problem is something else. It's the false negatives. So the 64-bit operating system can be safe, and it can be running still a legacy 32-bit, compatible application. And that application can be vulnerable, and it will crash or corrupt some data in 2038, even though it's on a safe 64-bit system. So a remote scanner will have zero visibility into the architecture of the actual processes that are running behind that system. Only an authenticated scanner could do that and probe all the processes running. So is everything that I'm speaking about the last couple of slides useful at all? I think it is. I think probabilistic, like remote scanning, it's not the answer, but I believe it's a good triage tool to help solve for this discovery challenge, not channel. So when dealing with a mass number of systems, a remote scan helps you sort out that unknown list into buckets that you can prioritize, start looking, start fix, start moving. But then we have to test, okay? And for 100% accurate assessment, you need to test each system. But testing means two different specific things. You can't just check the operating system and be done. This is the central problem of Y2K38. You have to check both the systems and the applications. And for any complex system, it has to be in situ. Why? Because simulations and lab tests, they make assumptions. You cannot fully, replicate the chaos and things that happen in a live test. And this isn't like theoretical. If you think about, if you know one of the most famous overflow failures in history is Ariane 5 rocket explosion. It happened because of this gap, okay? A 64-bit number, which is the rocket's horizontal velocity, was being converted into a 16-bit number. So the rocket was much faster than this predecessor, and when it surpasses that speed, after 37 seconds, the velocity got just too high, the 16-bit number overflowed, and the navigation system crashed. So this wasn't a time-based overflow, but it's the same thing. There's a number that overflows, and in this case, the device self-destructed. So why didn't simulations catch it? The code that crashed reused the Ariane 4 code. It didn't replicate in a perfect way. So here's some examples of things that you can test if you own like a nuclear submarine. You can start test your own nuclear submarine, but really, these things have to be tested. Satellites, missile systems, telecoms. I won't read the entire list. Part of the list is in red because I already tested, small subsample of those, and I found issues in every single one of them, cars included. So remember this. Time is a root of trust. And it's surrounded by assumptions, like it can only go forward. We are seeing that that's not true. Think about it, like certificates, cryptography, processes, logs, consensus, every aspect of our digital world is time anchored. TLS will break. It's easy to understand what that means. In our browser, what that means is you have a pop-up saying, oh, it's expired, but if it's your operating system, it will probably won't update. Maybe you have a warning, maybe you don't get a warning. If it's machine-to-machine communication, it will just silently fail. You get no warning. So what I'm here to tell you today is this. All these 2038 rollover vulnerabilities, they can happen today. You don't have to wait 13 years. You can make them happen today, and that's a problem. NTP is not secure. GPS is not sovereign. Time manipulation is fairly easy and inexpensive, like GPS spoofing, NTP injection, file format fields, fuzz protocol timestamps. This is real, this is lab tested. Systems will fail, sometimes silently. We don't even know where most of them are. Just a little over a month, China publicly accused the NSA for penetrating their national time service center networks between 2022 and 24, and they were allegedly messing up with time, desynchronizing time by a very small fraction. So these kind of attacks are happening today. Now imagine This little snail over here is my, well, not mine, ChatGPT depiction of Subtle Snail. Subtle Snail is an Iranian group that's targeting telecoms here in Europe. They were uncovered like some weeks ago. Imagine if they go into an ISP and start pushing down spoofed NTP packets at scale to everyone. What will crash? We don't know. What an easy, cheap, and potentially disruptive attack. Remember, who controls the clock controls the system. Now, if after all of this, if you're feeling like this urge or this itch, okay, I'm going to go back home and I'll start changing the date on everything. Remember, two major things. One is setting the clock is like picking a lock. You don't do it if it's not yours. And you don't do it if you depend on it, of course. And this is a question for you before I leave. If a device won't let you set the date while you're testing, if a device won't let you set the date past January 19, 2038, ask yourself why. Trey.
Oh, I think we should give Pedro some round of applause. That was magnificent. So now I'm going to try to take us on out to the close here. So, Hit Me Baby one more time. I didn't really actually like Britney Spears until I started doing this research, and then I found that she's kind of cool. Anyway, in the 90s, pop and panic both went global. Y2K did not sneak up on us. Peter de Jager warned us back in 1993, and the world listened. We had UN coordination with over 120 countries, national task forces. czars were appointed in 1999. The US and Russia, still barely speaking after Kosovo, opened a joint missile warning center so that a glitch would not accidentally start World War III over the Y2K rollover. That's how seriously we all took it back then. And it wasn't just code, it was coordination and investment. The dot-com boom did not start with venture capital. It started with Y2K remediation. Y2K forced a global audit. It built the safety net that made the digital economy possible. When Y2K passed, we stopped investing and the first dot-com bubble popped soon thereafter. The digital age was built on a successful failure avoidance campaign. Society saw that technology had made technology safe for society, and we believed the risks were behind us. If we act together now, we're not just preventing disaster, we're laying the foundations for the next era. We're at T-minus 49 quarters. So what did Y2K really cost us? Adjusted for today's dollars, on the order of 1 to 2 trillion. And what did we get for that? Nothing happened. That's because it worked. See, this is the paradox of Y2K. The success of the remediation effort made the return on investment invisible. And so now no one sees the business case for 2038. And 2038 will be harder. So it's worth asking, is this a problem which is solvable, or should we all just go get drunk? We wouldn't be here talking to you if we thought it was a case for despair. There is much room for hope if we start to act soon. Like, can we fix this so? Well, coordination is failing us right now, but technical fixes do exist. The challenge is deploying them across billions of devices. IPv6, remember, took us over 30 years, and we're just about halfway done. 36 and 38 converge in 1 decade with embedded systems, bad incentives, and no coordination. If we face that reality together early, we can still blunt the worst. That's why we need to remember that not all failures hit us at the same speed. Triage by tempo is the only sane strategy, and may I say, I think I invented the Britney blackout slide effect here. So what we don't want, though, are cascading blackouts. First, life safety. If medical or aviation systems desync, people die. Next, command and control. A false timestamp in deterrence or live ops can escalate a crisis. Then, critical infrastructure, power, water, transportation, where time desynchronization has the potential to cascade into black swan events. Last, the economy. Our markets unravel in slower motion. Money can wait, lives cannot. So we triage by tempo. Our reality will do it for us. And respect to Brittany. Now let's talk about the 800-pound gorilla in the room. We've known about 2038 since the 90s. But admitting this means confessing that our foundations are brittle. See, there's Amelia Earhart beside the gorilla. We pretend it's not there. We see it, but we pretend we don't. Y2K had prophecy and panic. Governments had to be seen acting, and so they did. 2038 just has burnout and fatigue. We're at the apex of an AI tech boom now. Smart money expects the bubble to pop any minute, and as it deflates, the veterans who built our last era will be entering retirement. What's left is a generation of cloud engineers who've never been taught what an RFC even is. Just as the rollover comes due, this timing is brutal. We'll need to invest trillions in the long-lived stuff we can't just reboot. Power grids, sensors, satellites, industrial controls, medical systems. Now, convincing governments, financial markets, and the public to fund a remediation at scale campaign for invisible systems during an economic contraction will be one of the hardest challenges of our era. We converged our entire planetary communications infrastructure onto internet protocols. If there's still a red line between DC, Moscow, and Beijing, it surely runs over internet protocols or relies on them. When the internet's clocks drift, there's no fallback communications plane, and so remediation is not optional. Climate change is glacially slow by comparison, local and gradual. 2038 is instantaneous. Everyone, everywhere, all at once. 3/14/07 UTC, 19 January 2038. Set a reminder. Put it in your calendar if you're able to. Because when that second ticks over, we'll learn whether we did enough. So politics rewards fearful silence, but physics sadly does not negotiate, and the supply chain gorilla is on the roof. 70 to 90% of critical technology depends on Asian production, but the dependencies run in all directions. Taiwan, China, the US, and Europe are all interdependent. We have different install bases, but the same vulnerability class affects us all. Pedro's data proves it. Everyone has this problem. It just manifests differently depending on what you run. Resilience isn't just about protocols, it's also about parts. You can't stockpile your way out, you can't compete your way out, and no one is going to willingly accept monopoly solutions. Trying to take advantage of each other's vulnerabilities simply guarantees we fail. Kong's on everyone's roof, and that monkey won't climb down by itself. Either we all coordinate or we all fall together. Now let's bring this home to where it actually means life and death. Dump technology today becomes systemic failure tomorrow. 2038 won't hit the world equally. Obsolete gear is already being dumped into emerging markets with unsafe firmware today. Hospitals, utilities, and transport in underserved regions will inherit the failures which richer nations refuse to fix. That's not technical debt, that's moral debt. The weakest prepared will take the hardest impact. Whose children will live with the failures we leave behind? Justice means exporting resilience, not vulnerabilities. And that inequity doesn't stop at economics, it reaches to defense. Oh no, that is so funny. I even used a dedicated laptop, so there would be none of that. Hang on a second. Sorry. So, this is Macaulay's big, gorgeous head. We might wish we were home alone, but we're not. Deterrence chains are brittle. A rollover during peak tension could escalate before humans even notice. Nuclear subs can't just reboot for patches. Every recall means a blind spot. Defense avionics misreading a timestamp could look like an attack. Even remediation has risk. Patch windows open use it or lose it logic. So I would submit that based on what Pedro described about the type of experimental, let's say, alleged attacks in this domain, time synchronization is a layer that most of us have never pen tested or even seen a conference talk about. And so perhaps we should not be monkeying around here at a time when the world is on the brink of wider conflict. But with less than 49 quarters remaining, it's important to remember that under the best of circumstances, we're already running late for 2038. We need to fix this first in coordination or we fall together. This is a competition unless and until we decide to cooperate. It's hard to think when you're trying not to sink. And so we do our thinking now before we hit the iceberg. Here's what to do technically. Think Sweden. They treat time as critical infrastructure. Maybe we should too. First test, silent failovers don't self-report. Only test beds catch them early. Second, know your assets. Third, harden in layers, NTS, on-premise clocks, and rubidium or cesium backup so GPS's loss isn't fatal. Remember, this is about buying yourself time to fix the problem because the problem is exploitable today if your time upstream is manipulable. Harden in layers, isolate your control planes. Fourth, critical infrastructure should not be syncing time over the open internet. And fifth, clean your NTP hygiene. The net is polluted with junk Stratum X servers. Don't let bad time poison good systems. Treat time with as much care as you treat DNS. So 1 minute on policy and procurement. I'm very sorry for everyone who's playing the badge. We've talked about risks, but money still talks, and this is where some of our agency lies. At the national level, this is a TLP red conversation with your vendors. Procurement is leverage, demand, post-2038 certification, and make your vendors prove it. Push for a temporal bill of materials. At the regional level, this is a TLP amber conversation. See telecoms and grids and skate across borders. You can't just trust. You need to audit with your neighbors. Sunlight is leverage. At the international level, this is a TLP green conversation. See, these are, in many cases, going to be weaponizable 0 days that we're trying to remediate. So share wisely. Don't arm nihilists. No nation fixes this alone. Talk to your adversaries. Own your clocks. That's sovereignty now. So demand proof, audit, and coordinate. Sorry. Resilience isn't a patch for 2037. It's having a backbone in an upcoming meeting in Q1 of 2026. Here's one more tool. Obsolescent by design. When we procure obsolescent by design systems, every deployment becomes a countdown. Every upgrade, an amnesia ritual. Story time, and then we'll have questions. In pilot training, they said we wouldn't do spin training because it was too dangerous. More people died doing spin training than getting into spins. A spin is when the airplane does this, down to the ground. So my dad, who is a former US Air Force instructor pilot, said, no son of mine gets a pilot license without doing spin training. I was like, holy shit, no. But up we went. So here's a key thing to know about spins. There's a concept called minimum safety altitude, and it varies from aircraft type to aircraft type, but it's baked into the physics of the aerodynamics of the specific airframe. If you do everything right, it still is going to keep spinning for a while before you recover. And there's a minimum safe altitude to start the procedure before, otherwise, if you do it below the minimum safe altitude, you better hope your parachute has been serviced lately. That's not something you want to be thinking about while you're in a spin. Another key thing to know about spins is they are fucking terrifying. The ground gets bigger so fast and it's coming at you so fast and you've never seen it spinning like that, and your dials and your instruments are spinning and your controls aren't responding and all you want to do is shit your pants. But the only path to survival is a counterintuitive procedure. Power idle, ailerons neutral. That guy didn't pull up in time. So it's like a specific procedure that's 5 or 6 steps and you have to wait in between, and then when you do it, you still have to wait for a certain number of rotations before you know if you did it right. Back in 1912, a guy named Wilfred Park discovered this and people swore he made a deal with the devil. It's so unintuitive. Every primal animal instinct within you cries out to fight it, but the only path to survival is discipline, sequence, and steady nerves. I once I asked my dad, who's also a former airline pilot, how it was that he would go to a day job that involved carrying the moral weight of all those lives in the back and all the families who would be touched and impacted if something went wrong. And he said to me, son, it's easy. You're in the front of the plane, and wherever it goes, you get there first. So you focus on seeing your own family again. Now, we're not the pilots of the internet. The internet has no cockpit. It's a distributed system. This is by design. But we are its stewards. Who flew here to Lisbon? So those of you who made the trip by plane, I want you to think about the stewards whose job it is to make sure that everyone is in a dignified brace position if there's danger. In terms of 2038, we are above minimum safety altitude, barely, but the airframe is already locked into the spin. We may do our jobs so well that the public doesn't notice in 2038, but we will notice. Stewardship means acting decisively with the information we have been given. When we normalize expiry within our critical infrastructure, we convert time into debt. When that throwaway logic infects the invisible computational substrate that upholds civilization, it stops being a business model and becomes existential risk. The aircraft is spinning. Remediation is not optional, and there is still time. 2038 isn't just a technical deadline, it's a moral one. See, around Y2K, Dennis Ritchie, co-creator of C and Unix, gave a talk at Bell Labs where he was asked about Y2K vis-a-vis Unix, and he said Unix has no issue until 2038, and I don't care because I'll be dead by then. And he was right. Dennis died in 2011. May he rest in peace. This is not a criticism of Dennis. It's a reminder, like many of our software design patterns, Dennis too was mortal. People keep saying to me, Trey, you're just too early. And I say, maybe, but I just keep seeing these kids and students on trains and thinking about what they're going to inherit. Remediation isn't heroism. It's being an adult in the room. And getting home to your own family in this frame means realizing the impact this problem space will have on your life and that of your loved ones. You may say, but I'll be long retired by then. This is someone else's problem to fix. But I ask you, do you want to retire as a hunter-gatherer? Don't wait to be warned by your national authorities. You have been warned today. ITD, inventory, test, demand, proof. Write that down. There's your practical audience takeaway. And so with that, we'll move to Q&A. I'll simply say this. Every resilient system begins with a courageous human who refuses to shut up in a meeting.
Remember, guys, setting a clock is like picking a lock. Thank you.
Oh, no, good job, man. Maybe we get a picture.
Any questions?
We do have a few minutes for questions. It is hard with these lights.
First of all, I wanted to say thank you for this talk. For a person that's inherently stressed, this has made me think about so many things. So the first question that I have is, what do you think it's the best thing that we can do, like as a developer, that has the best return on investment when I go into work tomorrow or Monday? And the second question is more of a curiosity due to all the embedded systems that don't have a way to be upgraded or patched. Do you think we will have a problem with e-waste and managing all the things that will be thrown out? And those are my questions.
I sometimes think about that and cry while I'm washing the dishes, but I didn't want to put that in the talk. You're right, this is going to produce immense amounts of e-waste. One of the problems is we need to just stop making the problem worse today. People aren't testing for this. We're importing devices, we're deploying devices, we're embedding devices. Think about how many computers are in a car. Like, on average, I hear about 200 in a Tesla rolling off the line right now. There's a lot of embedded systems in there, and they're not testing for that. What are you going to do with all that? How are you going to rebuild all that? You know, there will be tremendous amounts of waste. But if we could just start testing and stop making the scale of the problem bigger today, that would already be a start.
Yeah, and I don't want to go into geopoliticals. That's what you do, but indeed there's this temptation of just getting rid of those systems to countries or nations that have less acquiring capabilities, so you can get rid of your old stuff, buy new stuff, and just allocate the problem to someone else. As for your stress levels, yoga helps. It helped me. As an engineer, just being aware of this is an issue, it's the first step, I guess. But then you have to start making questions. Where does time touches all my processes? Where does time touches the systems that I'm building, and how can it fail if it's something related to time? Because you might not be able to control the system where your software is running. You might be producing perfectly, apparently safe software, but then it's running on an unsecured operating system. So it's not easy, it has to be a coordination effort throughout the entire software development life cycle, I mean.
Yeah, thank you so much once again for this talk.
If you're asking a question, we can't see you because of lights, so just talk, otherwise clap. So we know what to do.
Hello. Hi, Pedro. Hi, Darley. Are there currently any scanners for this that would sit on the system to check if, for example, libraries are using 32-bit counters, things like that? So anything that would allow, I know that there are systems that are closed and for which this can't be done, but at least for systems that are open and where we can run stuff that will help us identify protocols, libraries, etc., that have these problems. Any existing ones or being developed that you know of?
That's an excellent question. First of all, running locally means you have much more access rights, so you can see more stuff, and that's kind of the only way to be sure is to do what you just described, scanning all the binaries in the system, understand what time libraries are they running in, what's the operating system version and architecture. I'm not aware of any particular piece of software. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means I'm not aware of it.
I will say this, that's a great idea, but also that we're not the best self-promoters. This is a big talk, and so we tend to run out of time, and so we've skipped this part. We're trying to spearhead, coordinate a broader effort, so apocalypseproject.org is got a sign up, but also we're setting up this time security special interest group inside of first.org, which Pedro and I are gonna co-lead with, to try to coordinate stuff like volunteer efforts to create the scanners, to put them on GitHub, to, you know, this is work that has to be done.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe we should work on that.
Any more questions? I don't think there is. Well, thank you for coming after lunch.
It looks like we're out of time.